Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to Smart Connected Buildings and the next webinar in the series of digital construction series. So, over the past few weeks, we've been talking about various facets and topics around the digital transformation of a laggard industry, which is the real estate industry, and also the construction industry. So today I'm joined by Dr. Jamie Dupay, and Jamie is the director of an organization called eDocuments. With no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jamie. Jamie, do you want to provide a little bit of background to yourself, a little bit of background to eDocuments and your journey, and then we'll dive into the specific questions.
So I'm the CTO, the Chief Technical Officer of eDocuments Limited, often just referred to as eDocs in the industry. And I focus on all things data, really everything from data architectures, integrations with third-party applications and environments, a lot of the information security, and more recently, data analytics and really gaining business insights from those data analytics. So I have a doctorate in science and engineering, and I specialised in laser spectroscopy. And that's where I first sort of realised that you can use software to solve an absolute whole host of problems out there in the world. And applying that to digital handover information, it just happened to land on my plate. So I then got involved with that. And the real goal was just to actually automate the production of O&Ms. And the simple start to that was actually to implement a database and start to put all the clauses information into a database, and then build software around that to automate it. And it was totally an internal tool. We just built this internally so that we could deliver O&Ms quickly, more accurately. So for years, I actually wrote much of the software and source code for the eDocs platform. And I now really concentrate on the development of the business insights. So I use a mix of APIs, getting data from databases, data lakes, data warehouses. And I find those business insights that make our internal processes better, but also make the quality and data assurance better for our clients and end users. So that those insights that we find, we can now visualize those into reports such as Power BI. Much of this is done in Power BI. And that's how we deliver that to the end users.
Thanks, Jamie. So just to get a flavor, so obviously I've got to know you and eDocs really well over the last few months. And when you say eDocs, I view eDocs as the best of British, right? You're a British engineering organization based out of Essex. Just go back. When did your journey start? In what year? Because what I think is really important to get across here is that you're just not one of these new prop tech startups that's popped up in the last, let's say, 3 years post-COVID. This is something that you've been doing for a long, long time. So just provide a bit of more background about when you started eDocs and how you and obviously Leicester has basically grown the business over the last 20 or so years.
That's correct. So I'm one of the founders. So we started back in 2000. So we were a joint venture with a construction company. We had one desk in the corner of their office for a few years, and we were just creating the MEP manuals for subcontractors and interacting with the supply chain. And this was all paper based at the time. We had a little filing cabinet in the corner of the room with all the old literature, and we used to flick through it, find it, and hole punch it and put it in a folder. And that was crazy. So I very quickly thought, this is, we've got to automate this. So the version 1 database was built, and pretty much by 2002, we had our first version of Manual Builder. And this was an SQL database that we used for creating the O&M manuals. And it really just had a big literature of manufacturers' information. And it automated the picking of, say, a pump catalogue or a boiler catalogue, or, a Grundfos this, a Broag that. And that was back in 2002. And, amazingly, we were holding the data digitally at that point. But it was an internal tool. By 2003, 2004, we realized, wouldn't it be so much easier to do the commenting online, because we were manually printing off drafts of the document, put them in the post or a courier, off they go to someone for a comment, comes back with a load of red ink on it. So it was automating that commenting. That was the next step. So yeah, 2003, 2004, we gave you the ability to comment online. And that's when it started to take off. So 2004, we got involved with SIBSI. it was all around with the logbooks, the TM31 standard. So we actually helped with the examples within that. And that also fed into our online solution. So we then had a digital version of the building logbook online. And then again, we got to a point really around now, Microsoft showed some interest in us and gave us a little bit of funding. And this was kind of late 2008, 2009. The important point here is they had a product that they called Red Dog, and there was funding available for this. So we thought, oh, this is interesting. And it was a cloud technology. So a couple of years later, they gave it a rebrand and they decided to call it Microsoft Azure. But we'd already been on this road. We were absolutely flying by the time the rest of the world was starting to look at Azure. So we adopted Azure before it existed. And that's when we had the kind of V6 platform, what we call the V6 platform. And a lot of that technology is in there today. This started to look at BIM. We had an IFC viewers, we had panoramas, we had IFC handling, the industry foundation classes and their schemas, subset of which is Kobe. That was the schema that's really kind of carried on and sort of held the test of time so far. Kobe is obviously an important part of the, the BIM level 2, if you like, the ISO 19650. And that was part of the underlying foundation data layer of e-documents. So that was, this was back in, so we're still talking, 2016, 17 or something. Obviously, that's, BS was BS 1192 at that point. But the bit that came next was really the kite marking and the data assurance. We realized because we're talking about quality assurance and we're trying to assure the data as much as possible, validate the data as much as possible, we're building everything at an atomic sort of data level. We're not looking at documents. We actually have built lots of online forms and we're getting people to fill in forms. So we've got the data at kind of an atomic level where we can validate it at an atomic level, if you like. This is when we realized the importance of kite marking and assurance, because that's really what we're trying to promote. So we got certified for the ISO 19650 parts 2 and 3. And that is really what we sort of like to come back to and to say, yeah, we're really, we've gone to the effort of going through these kite marks because we take kite marking seriously. We take data assurance seriously. Probably the most recent part of the evolution is connectors, what we call connectors. And the most important part of probably the industry at the moment is sharing information, so that, the sayings that we've always had we started out as a business, and one of the fundamental goals was to put the data in once and use it many times. And we like to always come back to that one key pillar, if you like, put the data in once, use it many times. And connectors are an important part of that. So the most recent years developments have really been on interfacing with the CDEs. So we've got these data adapters, so we can pull and push files depending on their statuses, saving an awful amount, saving a huge amount of time. So that was mainly around the drawings and certificates, but more recently we've then worked with the Autodesk team, and we've started looking at extracting the data from models as well. So rather than just pulling and pushing data, we're pulling and pushing entities and attributes and parameters. So the documents platform, it was always built around data and really tearing documents apart so they could be validated as accurately as possible. And that's the direction we keep going. We want to push process-driven data assurance. So that was probably a bit of a long history, but that's kind of a 24-year timeline in short.
No, that makes perfect. It's really important because one of the philosophies that I stand by with Smart Connected Buildings is there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of BS that exists in the marketplace. I think most people watching this by now will know that I'm on a mission to cut through a lot of the bullshit that exists within the industry. And my role is to find people that are driving this positive change within the industry. And as I've got to know eDocs and the founders and the directors and understanding your story, I know you guys are sat on a mountain of value. And actually, when you look at O&Ms, it's a bit of a dry subject, which I think we'll both agree. But the reality is, I have a dream that one day every building will be run by an operating system that basically controls, manages, and automates a lot of the traditional paper-based and analog processes within the built world. And one of the things that I know that we've spoken about at length, and also with clients that we're sort of jointly engaged on is around e-documents and digitized O&Ms becoming the foundation layer for smart building enablement. So everyone's talking about this nirvana of this smart building platform that produces all of this information and all this data and real-time information and right information to the right person at the right time at the right context. But actually, I'm a pragmatist, right? Because if you don't actually get that data laid out in the right format to start with, you're going to be in a whole world of pain when you're actually at the top of the tree. So for me, it's about getting the foundational layer correct. So if we just peel back here, right? Because I want to make this real for people that are watching this, because we're going to have a variety of different, I know there's a variety of different skill sets that we've got here today. But a lot of the activity that you and I are talking to at the moment is around the healthcare and the education sector in the UK. And they're a very good example of, you've got two camps. You've got your facilities management fraternity that have got paper-based O&M manuals in a darkened room in the basement. And then at the other end, you've got the capital projects directors looking at building new buildings. And then you've got your main contractor and you've got all these different stakeholders. So it is quite a complex world, but if you do not get this right to start with, it's going to cause a whole world of pain as we go down the line. Can you just elaborate on that? Because I think it's really important for people to understand why this is so important, because I just see this wonderful world of value engineering. Everyone knows what my view around value engineering is. Why do you engineer out the value? Keep the value in the bloody deal, right? And for me, this is something that I see people missing the trick. So I'm going to hand the mic back to you, Jamie, just let you talk about the foundational layer for smart building enablement.
Yeah, I think that's the great question. I think, why is the foundation data layer so important? Well, and I think it's critical for several reasons, and it really comes down to, the interoperability and the data sharing. That's, I think, the first pillar for me. One of the best things that I think has happened is, COBie, which is a subset of the IFC, the Industry Foundation Classes, is maybe not the best format, but at least we now have or we've had it for some time, but we have a format that we can use to share between us. And of course, it's become an important part of the BIM level 2 deliverable, and working with principal contractors, and a lot of them, and many of them have signed up to this, and they're actually required to deliver a BIM level 2 deliverable, and which a part of that will be COBie. So the foundational data layer is good in many ways, because it allows us to try and get over the hurdle of some of these incompatible file formats. We want to be in a simple ecosystem where we can collaborate. And to do that, we need to be able to share it quickly and efficiently. So e-documents took that decision some time ago to build the underlying layer of our platform on COBie, because we knew that would be a solid base for taking the information from the designers, pulling in data from models, whether it's Revit or IFC, or could be Excel spreadsheets. And then we can do a whole pass of validation against that. So we've, using the LOIs, the level of information, and the classifications, we've got those rule sets. So we can actually fly through that data and validate it and say, right, this data is good, this data is bad. And we can feed that data back very quickly. And I think all parties need to be able to do that. If you're going to get to a point where we're actually providing efficiencies between us and everyone's gaining efficiencies, you've got to have a shareable data layer. And hand in hand with that is then the collaboration. What we're doing, the collaboration is the obvious answer, is that you need to be able to share it. You come back to the fundamental pillar of e-documents, do it once, and then reuse it many, many times. So get to the point where we're actually looking at the same data, it's got to be shared from a central resource, or at least be synchronized. So the reality is the construction industry is not geared up for everyone to just use a single resource. And the problem around that is the legal the risks involved with that. Often contractors will recreate the designer's data because they don't want to inherit a risk of what a designer's done. Not always the case. There's a lot of duplication. But the one thing you do need is efficient collaboration. So you want to be keeping those consistent file standards. So exchange the data in IFC, or exchange the data in COBie, or put your data in a centralized cloud where it can be validated. That leads into your BIM information modeling. So on the BIM side, make sure that you've got consistent delivery planning maintaining of those physical built assets, the physical assets, not through just the design stage, but ideally through the entire life cycle as well, when you're looking at the end user client. So it's getting to that point where you make sure you're updating the information you've got, and again, keeping it in these consistent standards. And this has all come from, the ISO 19650 suite. But they're probably the main pillars. And of course, why do you do it? Because you want to reduce your total expenditure. You want to improve your efficiencies. You want to make your project management simpler, and they are the core things that you have to do that. And I think your other point was around the kind of the health sector. And we carry out a lot of projects in the health sector, and they have their own nuances, I guess. There's a lot of political decisions. There's a lot of hierarchy there to get through to actually make sure that you can use you're trying to get people to use the best ways of doing the work. Use these processes, use these standards, and enforce that. And that can be difficult. But the answer is, don't worry about trying to digitize your entire history of legacy of what you've got. It's actually just start doing something now. So if you've got a small project, run that in the manner to digitize it. Digitize the assets, run it so it's COBie. Make sure you're try and get everyone involved, validating information. That's the trick, is start to apply the BIM processes.
Yeah, and I know we've spoken before where there's many stakeholders that benefit from this, but typically you'd get involved as part of the construction supply chain, but actually the actual asset owner, in the case of the healthcare sector, the NHS Trust, or the university in the case of education,
yeah,
they're the people that would really truly benefit from this. And I think the problem that I've always seen around deploying technology, whether it be software or technical assets within the built world, it's too easy to override decisions that are made at the beginning of a project. And once it's handed over to a main contractor, the vision that was always set out on, it just gets diluted, when actually the real value is post practical completion. Once you've handed over the project to the asset owner, they need that level of assurance that the data is in the right format, it's easy to access. And this is where I just see lots of asset owners catching a cold, because a decision's been made, rightly or wrongly, to scrimp and save on this. And actually, they've got to go back and redo a lot of what should have been done within the project. So a lot of this stuff is just trying to educate the market on why it is so important.
I think yeah, I mean, there are a few drivers around that are important at the moment. Certainly the fire safety, in the wake of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. I mean, that's an important point, is it's the responsible person making sure that in the data that you collect, you've got the responsible person tagged throughout that data. And this is the golden thread. That's really what we're talking about here, is making sure you can come back to that. And that really, to do that, you really need to centralize your data, or the changes that you're making to that data need to be centralized. And that's probably the significant step that they're going to have to make anyway, because it was under the previous, under the existing building regulations 2010 regulation 38, and probably more recently with the introduction of the BS 8644, which is really the enforcement of that regulation. They've got to make steps to improve that fire safety management, and compliance, and that's a key point. And that really comes back to this. What the design decisions, what the construction decisions, and capturing that whole golden thread all the way through. And again, that's one of the things that we've been, really keen to get right and implement in our processes and within the platform.
Yeah, and I think if you just tie this under regulation and compliance as a theme, is something that's not going to go away, and in fact it's probably going to become more and more stringent, and some would say onerous, but actually it's there for a reason. And for me, I just think people need to make the decision that actually you need this data, whether you're going to use it today, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. The bit that I want to implore people watching this is, it's not a matter of if you need the data, it's when you need the data. And I think at the moment, like most things that are happening in this digitization of both the built world and even the construction industry, people are just waiting. And it's like, when do we pivot, and when do we go and implement this? And for me, it's like, it's not a matter of waiting, it's a matter of just doing it now, because this data is categorically important. And I think this is what I want to get across to the actual asset owners that are going to be building new projects. I would stress that they need to make sure that this has to be done within the contract. So there is no wriggle room for my main contractor to say, yes, but we can use X, Y, and Z. And we can, because I just see PDFs flying around on email. And I think people think that email is the be all and end all, and email is a digital platform. It's like, well, to be fair, email now is a little bit old hat. And actually, you talk about collaboration. I'm a big one for collaborative planning, collaboration, because if you look at post-COVID, traditionally, if you look at a construction site, most people collaborate within a construction site project office. But actually, the reality is most people collaborate in the cloud. And that's the bit where I still think there's a lot of resistance. Maybe not the tier one contractors, but as you go down below tier one, I think there's a lot of opportunity and room for improvement. And this is the bit that I'm quite interested to get your insights on. Where do you see the friction from the industry? Why has the construction industry as a whole been resistant to this change of, let's keep it under the broad umbrella of digitally transforming their businesses?
I mean, that's a good question. I think a lot of the legacy, this is the way we did it before, and this is the way we always do it. And I think unless there's a real shift in, well, we've got the shift in legislation. So I think once you've got, a shift like the approach to fire safety, you've got to do something. So that's the kind of game changer. But with the contractors, primarily, cost is absolutely key. A lot of this, a lot of decisions are driven by cost. And engineering that cost as best as possible. I mean, it's a difficult question. It's an investment, isn't it? I mean, it really needs to be driven by the clients. I guess that's the point. It needs to be a client decision to say, no, we know there are costs involved for having this audit trail, so therefore it's got to be done. And they've almost got to kind of push that, right, this is the way we need it done. It's going to be hard to make the contractors change, I feel.
Yeah, and I think this is the bit that I wanted to delve into, because if I look at, I mean, our journey's been fairly similar, because if you just look at technology, software, automation, the reason you specify a common architecture is because you've got something that's repeatable, scalable, supportable. And the problem that I see is every time we build a new building, it's a completely new team, and it's as if we've never built a building before. And if you look at what goes on within, let's say, a university campus or a healthcare campus, because I know that's one of the big markets that we're obviously looking to assist in, is depending on who the main contractor is, there's different technologies that people use. And for me, getting this base level software platform has to be driven by the trust or the university, so that they can specify one common infrastructure. Whereas I think the challenge you've got within the construction market is not only have you got lots of different contractors that have their own ways of working, but then you've got their subcontractors and their subcontractors and their subcontractors, which makes this whole world even more complex than it needs to be. So I know this isn't an easy thing to solve. However, it's not a very difficult thing to solve if you win the hearts and minds of the various stakeholders involved in the process. Anything that you'd like to add to that, Jamie?
Well, I think when you're looking at the end users, end user clients, facility owners, there's a much bigger driver there for them, I think, because they've got, the whole of the operational expense, of this building. So they need operational efficiency. They're going to know that investment in data, has a value. also giving them insights into that data has value. There'll be many insights. There'll be insights that will help them with their risk management, which will be a key point. And, those data and analytics can really help with their decision making. So data-driven insights always support better decision making. They're going to minimize your project risks, and it should lead to an overall performance enhancement, of your projects and of the running of that facility. So those are real tangible savings that are going to be made by investing at the data at the foundation data stage.
Okay. And just before we wrap up, let's talk about data-driven insights, because for me, I always talk about value being created in the cloud, but the value has to be defined by the complex stakeholder environment, because actually value is in the eye of the beholder. And obviously there's a lot of different levels of value that can be derived from the data that your or any platform can offer. So I do know, without going into lots of detail around the roadmap and where you want to take this, I know one of the biggest, where I think your value as a business, eDocuments, but also your value as what I would call a domain expert within the industry, is you're combining that knowledge to really transform how construction companies are leveraging this data to actually make informed decisions. So do you want to just cover that briefly? Because I think that's an interesting topic that we can end on, and probably another topic that we can pick up at some point in the future.
It is definitely a bigger topic. It really comes down to the decision making. So if you're running, hundreds or 1,000 projects, as a principal contractor or as an end user client, one of the really interesting things is if you start to aggregate all of that data of all of those projects and you start to look at them for trends. And they might be, micro trends, macro, real time, strategic, tactical. There's lots of things you can start to think about. But you can look at your supply teams, your professional teams, how good are they at the thing they said they were going to do, and track that, from team to team, from region to region. End user clients will be paying professional teams to do certain job roles. Are they doing those? Are they doing them efficiently? And we might not hold all that data, but we certainly will hold, some interesting insights that can be used for decision making. So this is all with the goal of trying to drive accuracy and improve the performance. So that, those are the kind of pillars that we're working on. Is we want to get more accurate data. We want to make sure we've got that responsibility audit trail, and we want to do things as efficiently as possible. And that also allows us to then effectively keep the costs down, because we're efficient on both sides of this. But yeah, I think that's probably a more important piece for the industry. And I think we're beginning to see some of the bigger tier ones are getting quite good at thinking about this, are starting to build out data warehouses and looking at these analytics and insights. So we're just another piece of that puzzle feeding into their dashboards and analytics. But yeah, it's a key point.
Yeah, and I think, as I know, I myself are talking to a lot of contractors across the UK and the globe, but primarily in the UK. I think it's clear to see that many of the tier ones went on this, let's say, digital transformation journey going back to sort of 2011, 2012, but they're actually having to unravel some of the decisions they made, because they've got too many software platforms that aren't really integrated, and they're just stuck together via duct tape. And I think there's some new movers and shakers in the industry that have basically realized that actually, if we get our data and digital transformation strategy correct, we can potentially leapfrog people ahead of us. And this is the bit that I'm quite excited about within the industry, because I always talk about this isn't a matter of when you're going to digitize. It's like, you digitize or you die. I mean, that's the reality of where we are in the marketplace. And I get quite shocked at how behind certain organizations are when it comes to digital transformation. And the reality is, the real estate industry and the construction industry, it's not the first time I've said this, it's the last large industry to be digitally transformed. And that's because there's too many traditions to be broken, but this isn't a matter of you can't wait any longer now. I just think there's so much pressure now on the industry around data to make an informed decision making that people have to move forward. So, Jamie, I really appreciate your time. Anything that you'd like to discuss before we finish? Anything you'd like to say to the audience before we finish?
So what I was kind of thinking is, I continue to be amazed on how disjointed the construction industry and built environment are around data. And I think a lot of that is to do with the legacy data and legacy processes. But I think probably the important point is that by using quite standard, simple research and analytics, you can make much better informed decisions. And ultimately, that's what will help to deliver the assured data to building users. And that will tick all those boxes to do with whatever legislation comes along down the line. It will effectively future-proof all the data you hold. So when we start to talk conversations about AI, which we're heavily looking into as a business, is how can you use AI to really elevate all this data that you hold? And if you hold your data pretty much atomically in sensible schemas, then it becomes very, very powerful. And that's the value there is, can I ask sensible questions of my data and get sensible answers?
So, Jamie, just finally, before we finish the webinar, I want to go back to one of the things that I think is really important to understand is we talk about digitally transforming a fairly laggard industry. And at one end, there's been a lot of resistance from the construction market, but then you've got new trends like AI, ML, cloud computing, data-driven insights and things now basically driving the C-suite agenda on. It's not a matter of if you're going to do it, it's a matter of when you're going to do it. I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on why you feel the industry has been quite slow. I'm going to talk about the industry. I'll talk about real estate and the construction industry. Why has it been quite slow to adopt software, data analytics, and various platforms such as e-documents to drive their businesses forward?
Yeah, so I continue to be amazed on how disjointed the construction industry and the built environment are around data. And I think a lot of that is due to, legacy data and legacy processes. It's not difficult to apply research and analytics, to make informed decisions. And ultimately, that's what's going to deliver assured data to building users. And if you structure your data using the industry foundation classes or the COBie schemas, or you use a set schema to hold your data, then it's going to be much easier to use the AI, artificial intelligence tools, machine learning tools to get really impressive value from that data going forward. And that's the important thing. I think we need to all be thinking about future-proofing our assets. So that's the investment that needs to be made up front. And by using a platform like e-documents and either exporting the data at the end or continue to host your data within the eDocs platform, we can deliver that. E-documents, we've been heavily looking at AI. And what we've found is to get really the best out of it, you also need to be structuring your technical content, like your technical system descriptions, your operating descriptions, your maintenance descriptions, with a bit of know-how and understanding in using the sort of templates that we've developed. You can get really powerful answers from questions that you ask against the database. And that's the real key. So if you can either do that with new projects on your estate, if you're a big NH trust, for example, even if you just start doing your new projects in that method, then you're automatically gaining value. The real win is if you can actually got the investment to take your legacy information as well and start to backfill that into the platform. Because then when we're focusing the AI engine against it, you've got an even wider umbrella of data for it to look at to make even better, more informed decisions. So these are the things that we're really concentrating is it's critical to structure your data correctly, and that requires an investment. It's also critical to make sure you've got that golden thread audit trail of responsibility, who did what and why and when, so that you can answer any questions that come along with legislation in the future. And a lot of this we've learned from the tragedy that was the Grenfell Tower. And I think that's the thing that's really beginning to awaken the end users to actually make this shift.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think increasingly I'm talking to a lot of the C-suite or the management team of main contractors within the UK. Some get it, many don't. And I think at the moment, one of the big drives that we're pushing within Smart Connected Buildings for 2024 is to sit around the table with the decision makers, but by putting together subject matter and domain experts like yourself, Jamie, we're here to help create and define the business case of how data can really drive business value. And I think when you look at digital O&Ms, as we've said at the start, it's a fairly dry subject. But actually, when you drill down into the data and the insights that your platform has now created, this has become a C-suite conversation, because the data insights that you're getting from the supply chain in a porter cabin in the middle of a construction site, people just don't have that level of data. And when you aggregate that over a number of projects across the UK, and in many cases across the globe, it's aggregating that data, but putting intelligence on it to allow people to make informed decisions. So there'll be a lot more to come from this series. No doubt, Jamie, there will be a part 2 to this, because I can see lots of questions popping up in the chat box at the moment. Lots of people have got lots of ideas and insights. So we'll now end the main section, and we'll move into the Q&A, where we can probably drill down and answer a few specific questions. But if anyone's watching this in a recording, Jamie, I'm going to pop up some details. I know you've said if anyone wants to reach out to you and have a more detailed conversation about any of the topics we've discussed, they can drop you an email at jamie@getedocuments.com, and you're more than happy to hop on a quick phone call, have a chat to them, and help unpick, unravel, and solve some of the challenges that they may be having. So, Jamie, thanks ever so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.